Everybody. There's been a lot of requests over the last year or so for me to look at how I teach the concept of now and what that means. And rather than write it down and distribute it, I thought probably better to pop it on here, and then anyone who wants to look at it can look at it. So hello. And if you don't know me and you're just joining in, my name's Jenny Critchlow. I'm on jennycritchlow.com. And I teach all sorts of interesting things like meditation and shamanic dreaming, but underneath it all is a really interesting teaching around the now and how we are taught to build a persona rather than a person in our lives, and how we can undo that and start to build the person underneath. And a lot of this teaching starts with looking at what we mean by now, because often I'm teaching maybe a beginner's meditation, or I'm teaching a course where we look at anxiety or depression or distress in some ways, or I'm working one-to-one with a client, and we're looking at their continued dissatisfaction or upset. And over the years, what's happened is there's been a lovely diagram that's developed, and I use that to show everybody what we mean by the now and why it's so useful to be there. So when we teach something like meditation or mindfulness, the idea is that this isn't necessarily the thing that makes everything better. It's what you get from that afterwards, and it's where we train our brain to be here and be present. And most people don't really understand that. So we're looking at ways of meditating maybe, or ways of thinking, or ways of being that allow us to maybe feel more relaxed or deal with anxiety a little bit more, or whatever aim we've got. But we don't actually understand how that comes about. And in my experience anyway, it often stops people putting in their daily practice because the results aren't there. And so the willingness dies off. And a little bit like a diet, if you don't see results quickly enough, often we just give up and we go back to living a life that was possibly causing us suffering, but we can probably tolerate right now. And so this video looks very simply at the diagrammatical teaching of the now. It doesn't look at any of the others, but I possibly, if people want it, I'll put the rest on. So what's now? Well, if you've thought about it at all or done anything around the now is all that can be. And in order to explain that and to explain why it's so important, I use a diagram. So just have a look at this and I'll explain it further. I hope you all appreciate I've had to write this backwards for you to be able to read it on the screen, which I think is multi-talented, obviously. Here we go. So if you can see this, this is a symbol. Can you see the sideways 8? That's a symbol that we all tend to see as the symbol of infinity. So it's a symbol of time, and it's made up of the past and the future, and where they meet is this place called now. So this place called now is all that can exist. So if we look at the past here, the past doesn't exist. It can only exist in our head. So even the beginning of this video is now in the past. It doesn't exist now. The past and the future meet at now. And the minute you notice that, that's already a past moment. And the past is really useful. So you can read this because hopefully you learnt to read in the past. I'm sitting on a seat because I know what a seat does, and I can work a computer and I can talk English. Only English, I'm afraid. So we bring lots of useful things from this past of ours into the now that make living now interesting or useful or sometimes pleasant. But we also bring in our stories. The past is filled with our stories. We tell them constantly, because in this now moment there is no story. There's no story to tell. There is just now and what is in front of us now. And in the past, there are loads of stories, loads, and they're brilliant. In fact, most of us collect them in a big bag and then we drag them round and pull out the bits of story we want to hold in front of people to tell them about our past and what that means. And we also think our story in the past. So we pull out stories, half-remembered conversations, incidences, places where we were wronged, where people wronged us and upset us. And we pull those into the now all the time. I mean, you can be driving to work and fall out with 4 different people before you get to work. 4 people you may not have seen in a month. One of them may even you haven't seen for a couple of years. But we hold the story of the past, and we tell the story of the past, and we argue the story of the past, and we contaminate many a great now moment with our story about our past. The interesting thing about the past is it's subjective. So whatever you tell about your past, someone else will have a different version of it. You can't help it. Our brains start to fill in gaps. They start to change things around. We're absolutely convinced we're right and we'll argue it till the death. But the fact remains is the past is subjective. It's our opinion of the past and it's our selective memory of the past. And normally our stories about the past make us right and or victim. That's a bigger concept that we can go into another day, but mainly that's what our stories of the past do. And so we contaminate this now moment with all of our monkey mind thinking about the past, bring it in here and cause ourselves quite a lot of distress when we're possibly just sitting in the car and it's quite pleasant. And if we took away the thought and the story, I may well be quite still. And so that's the past. It doesn't exist. It's a story. We tell it all the time. Tends to make us right and or the victim. And we quite like living there sometimes. It's a nice little thing to nudge in us. And then we move to the future. And just like the past, the future doesn't exist either. It is a concept in our head. In fact, the future is lots of little... I'm doing this backwards again. I hope you're impressed. Lots of little now moments... Make those a bit bigger. Waiting to come into existence. Can you see those? Shall I make them darker? So these are just the now moments waiting to come into existence. They can't actually exist until they're now. The most important thing to remember, though, about those future now moments is that the quality of each future moment rests entirely on this now moment now. It can't be any other way. Every now moment holds the seed for the next now moment. And my best analogy with this really is a diet, mainly because most of us understand the concept of a diet. So if I decide I want to be 30 pounds slimmer in 6 months' time, there are various ways I may go about it, but I may eat nothing for a week and exercise like a demon and lift weights and stop. And then in 3 months' time, really don't look any different. Or I could just eat salad on Monday to Friday and eat 10 million donuts Saturday and Sunday and possibly still don't look much different in 3 months' time, which is a bit gutting. But there we go. I've been there so many times. But it's good, and it's a good useful analogy for the future, is that anything you want differently in the future takes the little bits of attention and decision that a diet does. The ingredients have to go in every little bit, every now moment. So the future doesn't exist. It is simply the seed. The future is the child of now. And in order for the future to hold anything that you choose to bring in, there has to be a seed of it sown in the future, in the now moment, sorry. And the interesting thing about humans is that we live here. Most of us do anyway. We live in the future. we think that there is a future moment that is better than this moment now. And we convince ourselves when we get there that we will feel better. Which is why I call this point the when I point. And you can list a million when I's. When I have, when I am, when I weigh, when I get, when I own, when I earn. Oh my goodness. There's so many. You can even attach it to others. So when he changes, when she understands me, when I leave, when he leaves. Think about all the games we play where we tell ourselves a story that at some future moment we will feel better than now, that it'll all be better when this thing happens. And we live as if that's going to happen, without actually necessarily doing anything in the now moment that changes it. The same as if I'm thinking, well, when I am thin, in 3 months' time when I'm 30 pounds thinner, I will feel better, but I don't actually do anything about it. The interesting thing about the when I moment is that quite often it's around 6 months away, because we don't have to do much about it if it's 6 months away, but it's close enough for us to convince ourselves that the future is near and we're going to feel much better in about 6 months. And this is really how we live. I mean, so the people who live in the past tend to be depressed, and people who live in the future tend to be anxious. But we all play this game, and we all spend our lives avoiding the now moment with stories about a future that we'll feel better in and a past that we are right to and victim to. Because now's quite peaceful. It really is. It has no thought about future or past. It just is. And that's the secret to this, is that be here now with no thought or dialogue about the past or the future. Get still and peaceful. Take away the stories and you sow different seeds. And so all these other future moments can start to come into existence, that may even hold the when I am thin, or when I earn the money, or when I have the car, or when we have the children, or when the children leave, or whatever else we're playing. It may well do, because you've put some peace in between the stream of thought and your existence. And while there's much more to this concept that we'll pull on at some point, this is the point of meditation. This is the point of mindfulness. This is the point of what we mean when we say you need to live in the moment. Is that when you live here and now, when you put this practice in, it's not because that practice brings great rewards. It teaches you, it trains your brain to live here. So you drive to work and you don't argue with anybody. You can do the ironing and not fall out with somebody or end up in tears remembering something that happened. You're just ironing. And in that peace, in that moment, your entire system gets a rest at the very least. But in that moment, life takes on a whole other quality. But it has to be experienced in order to be understood. And what happens then is your mind is trained to shush. And you have more and more of those quality moments of peace. Because our monkey minds are no longer in charge. Just for that second, they're not in charge. And at the very beginning of every workshop and every course and every talk I do, it's always worth bringing this teaching into it. Because everything else comes from there. Once we understand the past and the future, once we understand our story, we can choose again. And we can begin to look at why we don't let go of the stories that we believe are causing our suffering. It's really worth having a look at. So that is the very preliminary teaching that we look at about the now, and why it's important to, or it can really serve you to look at it and to begin to practice ways of being in it. I hope this has helped, and any questions, please do let me know. I'm on jennycritchlow.com, and thank you for listening.